Hello, everybody. Welcome back again, for most of you, to this series of talks and speakers that we've had this semester. Cyborg Buddha, New Technologies of Awareness. There's an app for that. And, you know, most of you have been here before and heard this talk before about what the heck. You know, in my brain, Buddhism has evolved thousands of years of techniques, things I call technologies, in order to enhance your well-being, in order to change your experience of the world for the better. And they've evolved them in lots of different countries across the world. Lately, you know, those technologies have come to the West, and as they've come to the West, of course, they've encountered all kinds of new currents and new ways of doing things. And so I think we're really in the midst of an amazing, in my experience, a moment in the world of the evolution of new technologies of awareness, new ways of dealing with pretty much the same kinds of questions. And to some people, they're shocking. The idea that the Dalai Lama is willing to put a wire in his head in order to eliminate suffering freaks out some people. The idea of a pill that is, you know, or psilocybin or whatever that you might take that might enhance your awareness is scary to some other kinds of people. But all of these kinds of things are here, and they're with us, and they're evolving, and it's part of a great conversation that we get to have and that we get to facilitate here at Smith College. So this semester, that's the theme we're exploring. There's lots of people to thank that have made this happen. You know, the typical suspects like the lecture committee here at Smith College, the Kent Fund, which I run, so I get to spend indiscriminately, the religion department, the philosophy department has contributed to this, and particularly the ethics department, because they're very interested in sort of the ethics of some of these technologies. The psychology department and the School for Social Work have all been part of this. So tonight we get to listen to Robin Arnott. Is that Arnott?
Arnott.
Arnott.
Yeah.
Like R or Arnott?
Yes.
No. I don't know why. I just gave you the French benefit of the doubt, even though I know your accent doesn't sound very French.
No.
So anyways, Robin is an award-winning audio designer and interactive artist, best known for that creepy gas mask game. It's rather, I'm going to say, infamous out there in the world. And as he's put it, or at least as his bio puts it on his webpage, he's done it wrong 100 times, but the 101st was awesome. He loves play. He loves learning. He loves the future and how you and he will help create it. He wants you to prove that everything he thinks is wrong. He thinks that the way it's always been done is stupid. He thinks the way it's always been done is beautiful. Now here, just to give you a little bit of a, you know, these are some of the comments made about this creepy gas mask game, Deep Sea. Something hits when the mask and the headphones go on. A primal fear compounded by the understanding that no one else is going to understand what you're going through and that no one else will see it when you die. Another one. You miss a shot, you waste more time. The more time you waste, the higher your anxiety level and the harder it is to control your breathing. It's a vicious cycle. Couple that with a stifling mask, this wholly new gaming experience can be terrifying. Arnott is one of a growing number of indie game designers who have abandoned the notion that video games should be fun, choosing instead to focus on the interactive experience. And this is a very important part of why he's part of this crew, right? To call Deep Sea a game would be discrediting the experience. It's more like a highly interactive theme park ride that ends with you feeling helpless and terrified. Jesus. And then finally, from Joystick
I won't be talking about that project
magazine,
mostly.
the scariest game ever. Well, thank God for his new project. Sound Self is his new project, and it's what's again stealing from his website, the collision of centuries-old meditation technique with the video game Trance. Turn off the lights, amp up the volume, and use your voice to fall through an odyssey of light and body. Designed as a virtual reality experience, Sound Self takes advantage of loopholes in human perception. Loopholes in human perception. We talked about that a little bit on Monday. To induce an introspective state of ecstasy. It is as much for the experienced desert wanderer. There's a lot of Burning Man in there, by the way, speaking that. Maybe that's where the desert wanderer comes from, right? As it is for the intrepid novice taking their first steps into alternative experiences of self. Inspired by a group Om on LSD, Sound Self is the ambitious follow-up to Robin's installation horror experience Deep Sea, with the revised goal of inducing a blissful meditation state instead of a suffocating terror state. I'm very glad for that move. And one other little odd thing that's happening, not today, but tomorrow, beginning tomorrow, here in Seeley Hall, is Conbust. And we have an annual Conbust, which is groupings of people who come together. They're very into gaming. They're very into, costume kinds of things and anime and all of that kind of stuff. And it's really too bad that they're not here when you're here, because, what you're bringing to the world, what you're bringing to the gaming, to the, I keep thinking of it as the gamifying of the project of awareness, is pretty impressive, and it would be very nice if they could experience, but you're a day early. Anyways, thank you, Robin.
All right, thank you.
Oh, and by the way, of course, the ubiquitous, should you like to be on the mailing list and you're not, by any strange odd chance.
Okay, so I want to start here with a just little, you said if you hear the word mindfulness one more time, but I just want to start here with a little mindfulness experiment, and I want you to be aware of something. If you go to, is everybody here, is anybody here taking notes or have a thing that they're taking notes with? So if you do, please just start writing whatever's on your mind or whatever you're thinking. You could be writing me down verbatim. You could just do it now. If you don't have something, just use your hands and imagine you're writing for me. And I want you, as you are doing this, to just take note of what it feels like to write, of what it feels like to use your hands. If it helps, you can write about that feeling. And I'll let you do that for a minute or so. All right, so if anybody, can you just shout out words of what this feels like to write to you guys? Anybody, I just want a word or two from anybody. You don't need to wait your turn. Just shout a word at me. Focused, yeah. Automatic, interesting. If we could all just proceed with this experiment one more step. Instead of writing, if you could find a neighbor and talk to your neighbor and speak about what it is like to speak, what it feels like to speak, what your voice feels like to you. Do that now. I'll stop you. All right, we're going to switch gears again. Now let's just change to a hum. And as you begin humming, kind of observe what it feels like to feel your voice. Observe what it feels like to hum. Now let's just bring it all together into a group om. Open your voice. And let's just chant together for a minute. Oh. Okay, so remember these things. I'm going to get back to that in a minute, or in a little bit into the talk. But now I'm just going to move on to the main body of the talk. I'm Arnott. I'm a game designer and interactive artist. I'm also an audio designer. I was an audio designer before I was a game designer. And I think the things that interest me about game design are the same things that interested me about audio engineering and audio design. As a sound designer, we don't really have a language for sound. We have a language for visuals. We have a language for how we see. We're visual creatures, right? And so I think we're very good at cognizing what we see and making sense of what we see and kind of compressing that into objects and images that we can handle and think about. With sound, not so much. And because of that, because we're not quite so much audio creatures as we are visual creatures, with sound, I find as a creator of sound, I can create content that just seeps under your skin without you getting a chance to realize how it's affecting you. So these are a couple of the projects I've worked on. On the top right and bottom right, these are games I've done sound design for, Antechamber and the Stanley Parable. Who here is a gamer or plays video games? Even like on your iPhone? Wow, okay.
I told you.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Note to self, expand a little bit on the video game stuff. All right, yeah, so doing the sound design for Antechamber, something I was doing a lot in that game. That's a very difficult puzzle game, very abstract space. It's a really beautiful game. I really recommend it. But doing the sound design for this game, I wanted to make people feel comfortable so that they could continue bashing their heads against these puzzles long enough for the puzzles to kind of work their way into the player's mind. So what I did in Antechamber was just throw in tons of birdsong, throw in tons of nature sounds, things that are beautiful, really soft tonal sounds. And even though the sound design was totally different from the visual design, and just like there's a really sharp contrast between the two, and you'd kind of expect people to pick up on that. A lot of the times people didn't, because we don't have a language for sound in the same way we have a language for imagery. So it just kind of gets to sink under your skin a little bit. You feel it. It affects your mental state, but you don't really get an opportunity to ask, why is this affecting my mental state? And the act of observing it affecting your mental state, the act of questioning it, I think for most people, gets in the way of actually feeling it most fully. Of course, like mindfulness is a practice of being able to observe something and also just let it affect you fully. But most gamers, perhaps not quite so mindful. So on the top right, that's Deep Sea. That's the game with the gas mask, the terror experience. And on the bottom right there, that's Sound Self. Well, that's an installation of Sound Self at Burning Man, and I'll be talking about both of these later. So this is my stuff. Oops. And I want to talk about game design as meditation technology design. I think of game design as trance design. And I think of so much of the way we use our minds and so much of the way we engage with the world around us as layers of trance. When we're born or when we're very young, maybe we don't have so many layers of trance, but as we grow up, we have deeper and deeper trances. And part of these practices that I'm sure you're learning a lot about and that I've been learning a lot about are kind of untangling the trances we've been picking up through our lives. But the thing with trance is it's really powerful. A meditation as a really effective means for untangling these trances is a type of trance itself. And I think designing a good game, designing a good video game experience, something that's fun to play, something that pulls you in and makes you feel something and plays with your mind, is creating a trance for the player. So I'll be talking about that some. I'll be talking about my game, Sound Self, and I'll be talking about using games as cultural leverage. So, video games are... most of you aren't gamers. I'm a gamer. I play a lot of video games. This is a video game, right? This is what video games look like. And unfortunately, this is kind of the standard for video games. Games as an industry took a turn sometime in the 90s and became sort of these empowerment fantasies, very targeted at male youth who maybe felt a little frustrated and disenfranchised. So you see all over the place in video games these violent power fantasies. But that's not by any means all that's going on. And especially right now, the game industry is really turning on its head. And I'm actually really excited to be in front of an audience who mostly doesn't play games. And I really want to encourage you, talk to me afterwards. I can recommend tons of really amazing games that don't do this. This is one. This, to me, is sort of emblematic of the contemporary video game and how it is challenging our notion of what a video game is for. This is from a game called Journey, made by that game company. In Journey, you play as this androgynous character, one of these people here, and it embodies the hero's journey. You're just trying to make your way to this mountain. And the game mechanics make you really feel love and connection. That was the goal of the game designers here. It was like, how do we make the player not feel empowered, not feel awesome, but how do we make them feel connected? And then Robin Hunicke, one of the producers on this game, it was the first person that blew my mind when she said, we're getting away from games as something that are supposed to be fun. And to me, Journey's a very fun game, but fun sort of happened as a side effect of connection. And the way Journey makes you feel connected is that it makes you codependent on another person. It connects you to a random other person. The only way you can connect is by tapping, or you can communicate is by tapping a button to make your character jump in the air and go whoop. And it's super minimalistic the way you can connect, but because we can't rely on these symbols to communicate, language, you get these super expressive dances and people moving together and kind of falling in love with each other as they play the game. The first time I played this game, I found another player and we stuck together through the whole time playing the game. And this one time, there was a monster in the game that came by and ate him, and I screamed because I had an authentic human connection with this person that I didn't know. So I want to talk a little bit also, before we really get into the bulk of this, is game design versus gamification. What I'm interested in is game design, trance design. And gamification has become sort of a buzzword in the game industry. And it's because we're seeing how powerful games are, how effective games are at motivating people, and other industries are taking note of that and gamifying whatever they're trying to do. Gamifying brushing your teeth, gamifying meditation, gamifying whatever. And what gamifying means is basically adding points and scores to it, adding those little endorphin boosts into whatever motivational system they need. I mean, frequent flyer miles are a gamification, right? You're trying to score up points and you feel a little proud of yourself for spending a little more money with this airline. And we're seeing this all over the place, and now we're going to be seeing it a lot with meditation. We were just talking earlier about the Muse app, and what they're doing is really interesting, but I think what they're doing in their software is sort of gamifying meditation. You meditate and you get points for it. You get alerted of how well you're doing. And while I think there's certainly something cool about gamification, adding points, adding systems of stimulus and reward to systems that might be helpful but might not have, intrinsic system of, it's adding an extrinsic system of reward to a system that maybe isn't intrinsically interesting enough, which is certainly the case for meditation for first-time starters. And who here, I'm assuming most of you meditate. Let me check this assumption just based on the, who meditates here? Okay, cool. Who had a really difficult time when they first started meditating? Right, yeah, I mean, it sucks. So here's a place where, like, it if I had if I'd had gamifying apps when I started meditating, it probably would have been a lot easier for me. But I'm not talking about gamifying here. I'm talking about game design. And in fact, when I think about game design, when I think about trance design, a lot of the things that people bring in from games and call gamification don't really apply to me. I'm not interested in points. I'm not interested in that endorphin reward for you did a good job. I'm not interested in an extrinsic reward for something that isn't intrinsically interested. I'm interested in making a system that when you interact in it, lulls you into feeling a certain way. That's what I think of as games. So, trance. What is trance? This is a trance, right? And video games are super good at getting us into a trance. I think when we resonate with a piece of art, we can be said to be entranced by it. There's something about you and that art and a feedback loop between you and that piece of art that everything else disappears. I remember the first time I saw The Kiss in, I just sat I forget the name of the artist. Do you remember the name of the artist? The Kiss, beautiful golden piece. Klimt, yeah. Klimt, yeah. So I just sat there on the floor and watched the light reflect off the gold, and I don't know why. I'd seen this painting 100 times before reprinted, but something about it, I just sat in front of it for probably an hour or so, and I'm not even really a fine art lover. But I was entranced. We talk in, or I've heard word in, I talk about trance. I'm interested in trance. I'm interested in trance design, and this brings up some red flags with people who are interested in meditation and enlightenment and Buddhism, because the awakening experience, a lot of people say, is like waking up from a trance, and I think in many ways it is. But of course, just as you have to use the mind to get out of the mind, I think of the mind as being made up of trances, and I think trance, when used intelligently, is one of the most powerful tools for unwrapping other trances. A lot of my thinking of trance comes from a book called The Way of Trance by Dennis Weir. So if you find this talk and my take on trance interesting, I totally recommend you pick up that book. It's a really nice read. So this is a trance. A trance is a mental loop. And when you're meditating, you're trying to stay present, stay right here, not get distracted by thoughts, not get distracted by whatever. Just pay attention and be here. But where did it go? On its own, a single loop like that is not a very powerful or effective trance. So, if you want to stay present, if you want a trance loop, like staying present, you need trances to support that trance. So, if you're meditating, you might have a trance loop of staying present, reinforced by a trance loop of focusing on your breath. As you focus on your breath, keep bringing your attention to the breath. That's going to assist the trance loop of just staying present, right? And when you eventually get distracted, because we all get distracted, if you notice yourself getting distracted and return to focusing on the breath, that also helps sustain the initial trance loop of staying present. So, the more complex a trance, the more stable a trance. And so video games are, I think, particularly effective at inducing trances, because if you think of a common video game mechanic like a competitive real-time strategy game, which I'm sure all of you play. But so take, you've all heard of StarCraft 2, or okay, maybe not. This is a different audience to what I'm used to speaking about. Okay, so imagine a game. It's like a war game where you have one team on one. You're playing a military, and you try to create a system that you're kind of creating a military-industrial complex, and then you face off your military-industrial complex with an opponent's military-industrial complex. And the whole course of creating a military-industrial complex and then having it go head-to-head against another opponent's, or a real person's military-industrial complex takes maybe 15, 20 minutes. So very fast-paced. So the kind of trance that this domination trance is supported by is, well, you have to enlarge your military so that you can face your opponent. And to do that, you have to construct additional pylons. And you also have to build secondary bases just to protect against your first ones in case your first ones get knocked over. But you have to increase your economy, which is going to support your ability to enlarge the military and then dominate. And also, starve your opponent. And you have to moderate your attention as well this whole time. And you have to keep exploring so you know what's going on. And you have to know your opponent. And all of these things are supporting one another. And if you create decoy actions to, so everything feeds in on itself. And you get this hugely complex trance, which is why people look like this when they're playing video games. Here it comes. All right, so how does a video game create a trance? The mechanics of a video game. Now, game mechanics are, let's take Mario, for example. Everyone's familiar with Mario, right? Or has seen Mario, okay. Can you just wave your arms and shout if you haven't? You haven't? You have, okay. So you don't know Mario. Okay. Mario is classic video game where you're controlling this little plumber, and you're just trying to move from left to right on the level, basically. And all your controls are you can jump, and you can do a little twirl jump, and as you're moving through the level, you just learn to jump on different platforms. You can jump on enemies to destroy them, and it's moving through the level and using enemies to aid your movement through the levels. And there are basically some things in your way that you have to do some combination of jumping over or dodging away from. In a game like Mario, your mechanics are you can jump, you can make Mario jump. You have to get to the end of the level. And that's pretty, there are other things as well, right? Like if you jump on a turtle, you can pick up its shell, and then you could throw that shell to affect a bunch of other turtles. But the mechanics of a game are the rules. And as your brain comes to understand the rules of a system, as you navigate those rules, you develop a trance in your mind that is roughly symmetrical to the rules of the game. So if your rules all support one another, if I'm designing a game and all the rules support one another really well, they're all really tightly integrated, then I have a tight trance that sustains itself. If I have rules all over the place, like let's say you take Mario and you have to jump to get across the level and stuff, and then every 30 seconds it just switches to Tetris, you're not going to have as tight a trance loop because those systems don't support one another. You're going to have two separate trances going on. And so this is why I think of game design as trance design. And why creating a game, you're creating sort of a mental structure for the player. All right, so here's a game that I played a lot a couple of years ago called XCOM. XCOM is a game where you are trying to defeat an alien force, and there's a lot of cover mechanics in the game. So to play, I have to move my units into cover and then shoot out from cover and then move to another cover location. And I remember at one point being so entranced by this game that I hadn't played it for about 2 days. But I was driving back home one day, I sat at a red light, and the light turned green, and my first thought was, I have to dash into cover across the street to get home. And I dashed into cover just by driving across the street, And it's something I didn't even catch myself thinking until like a minute later, where it occurred to me, and this is just something that happens when you have a really tight trance loop. Those loops stay in your body. And this is how, I think this is part of how we become civilized, right? The tax code is a huge tax, is a huge trance system, that we have to pay tax, that we the whole economy, the way we engage in the economy, the way, you're all here to get an education, and what? Yeah, government, and the way we interact with government. And we take so many of these trances for granted, such that when a child doesn't understand why you have to pay for something, or doesn't understand, it can be amazing. You can be like, wow, you're born not understanding the economy. Wow. And it's because you take this trance for granted, because you're taught this trance day in and day out for a very long time. And you could think of all sorts of things like these. All right, so let's say you were to make a video game, and instead of having dominate at the middle, you're creating a complex system of trances to keep you present, as with meditation. So I think of, there are so many meditation technologies, and you've all been hearing a lot about meditation technologies. I don't need to tell you meditation's a technology, right? This is something I'm really glad, like you mentioned this at the beginning, meditation itself is a technology, and we have many technologies developed over the last several thousand years that assist in staying present, create trances to maybe help us break out of other trances. So a singing bowl, for example, this is a technology I really love. You just like tap the side of the bowl and move your hand around it, and it makes a sound, and you focus on that sound, and you have to kind of pay attention to the pressure you're putting onto it, but eventually putting pressure on it just becomes subconscious. It just does it by itself. And it's a really magical loop. It begins by focusing you first really hard into, getting the sound going, and then it just becomes kind of automatic. The trance becomes automatic, and everything else just kind of fades away. I think singing bowls are a really powerful trance technology. So I want to just kind of quiz the room and again just shout out other things that come to mind as meditation technologies and maybe how they work. And I ask not to quiz, but because I'm genuinely interested, like what meditation technologies do you use and why do they work? So somebody just shout something out at me. Mantra, okay. Who said mantra? Mantra, okay. So what do you think works about mantra? Why do you think mantra what is your experience when you are repeating a mantra?
Well, it's like the circle. It's meant to bring you back, but it's a simple, you have to determine what it is that will be the least distracting.
Mm-hmm.
So often it's one word or an or something that you can, brings you back to, I'm not going to, it brings you back to center.
Sure.
But it's, I think, for me, I've always tried to simplify it. I don't know, maybe people have very long mantras, I don't know. But it's someplace where it's like home on the computer. You can just keep coming back to home.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Let me, a mantra is a really, really good example. Anybody else have a
Visualization.
Visualization? Okay, can you tell me how that shows up for you?
I guess for me, in my own practice, it's visualizing a lineage tree.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that's very focusing because if while I'm chanting in a different language and prostrating, so it's using a bunch of different faculties, and I can't drift
Mm-hmm.
because I'm multitasking so much and trying to focus on the thing that I'm trying to visualize on.
So this is quite a complex trance that you're using. And it's interesting, you say you visualize a lineage tree, right? And so you're returning to the same visualization every time you do this, which creates a meta trance that makes it more powerful each time. Let me just get one more from somebody. Yeah, or I'll get two more. Yeah?
Music?
Music. Yeah, tell me.
Different types of music, like different styles or genres, kind of have different effects on your kind of mental state. So if you listen to jazz, for example, classical, it's a lot different than hard rock.
Yeah.
Metal. So they all kind of are designed like systems, I guess, to facilitate certain states of mind.
And music is extremely systematic and extremely mathematical, right? Listening to a piece of music, it's like listening to an algorithm, and the joy in listening to a piece of music is seeing where it matches up to your expectations and where it defies your expectations. There's this dance between a loop of surprise and satisfaction, and music's incredibly powerful. What were you going to say?
I have a very strange one.
Please.
I have taken 3 lines that have meaning to me from the Jewish Shacharit morning prayers,
Mm-hmm.
and I sing them to myself over and over and over. And it's both the music, and I have this always happens to me
Mm-hmm.
in terms of physical movement, and also the meaning of those lines. Sometimes I'll say them 40 times, and they don't mean a thing to me, and then all of a sudden I'm back to why I chose that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I think the common thing between what we've been talking about here is repetition. I think the common thing in a meditation technology, in a trance-inducing technology, is repetition. And I don't totally understand why. I wish I knew more why repetition induces trance and why specifically repetition makes room and clears away other trances. I don't, but that seems to be the case. Repetition induces a trance. Repetition of doing your taxes every year induces a hell of a trance. Here's just some things that came to mind while I was preparing these slides. Prayer beads, prayer in general. I mean, some prayer can be, I think, very meditative. Some prayer, not so much. But prayer beads are very meditative. You're repeating the same task again and again. And there's, with prayer beads you have small loops and small rings and big rings. And so you have kind of small loops and big loops and any of these, like mandalas. Light and sound machines, which are super inspirational to me. A light and sound machine is basically just something you strap to your face that strobes in your face for a little while. Ritual, I think, is maybe the most powerful tool for inducing long-form trances. Trances that don't just last this moment, or maybe provide more powerful to a smaller trance. Right? The wedding ritual is something that so I've never been married, but I've been to a fair amount of weddings, and the ritual itself brings attention inwards and makes the repetition and the inclusion of tradition, which is another kind of memory repetition, makes it for a very powerful trance. I think actually ritual is something that, I'm not going to say it's missing from our culture because there's lots and lots and lots of ritual, but it's just not really usually spiritual ritual. It's more commercial ritual, which brings greater power to those commercial experiences. We were talking about government. We were talking about our relationship with the economy. So singing bowls, I talked about that. Prayer wheels, meditation itself. Musical instruments, another very powerful one. When you become a musical virtuoso or you begin to master an instrument, your sense of self completely falls away and you just become the instrument. You just become the sound. Percussion, I think, is also a particularly powerful meditation or trance induction tool. That was about 5 beats per second, and I found that a beat of about 5 beats per second is particularly powerful for inducing a trance state. Binaural beats, we were just talking about a little bit earlier. I don't really understand binaural beats very well, but they seem to have some impact on behavior and state of mind. So earlier we did a group ohm, and group ohms have sort of a historical importance to me. My first mystical experiences, my first experiences of a real connection and groundedness came from group ohms. And I think the loop that's happening in a group ohm is you're chanting, you're breathing, right? You have a repeated motion with your body that you are doing, and it's a motion you're very used to using your voice, but you do this bodily gesture of going oh, and you hear all the other sounds around you and hear how your sound harmonizes or doesn't harmonize with the voices around you, and maybe you correct your voice a little bit, and all of this begins to happen unconsciously. And as these loops become more unconscious, and here, I'm actually just kind of answering my own question earlier. Earlier I was saying I don't know why these loops are so effective for inducing trance, but I think it's because you establish a mental loop, you pay attention to the mental loop, and as the loop becomes automatic, your attention and disappears, so too does your attention on it. And you become just sort of left with sort of nothing. Anyway. Just the thing I'm thinking, because when I'm doing a group ohm, I begin by thinking how I'm harmonizing with the voices around me. And after 5 minutes of doing that, I'm not thinking about it anymore. I don't exist anymore, except as a sound. So I think video games are starting to, I talked about Journey a little earlier. I think we're starting to see games that are treating that central loop instead of like dominate or attack or be awesome or whatever. We're starting to see games that create something a little bit more like a meditation. So these games, if you want to write these down, if you're interested in trying some different stuff out, the top left there, Proteus, is a total must. It's super beautiful. Proteus is a game where you just walk around an island, and the seasons change, and then the game ends. And it's beautiful. You just walk around, you explore, you discover new things. Maybe you chase a frog for a little while. And the soundscape is incredibly musical and responds to you. You feel it responding to you, just like a group Om kind of responds to you in this dynamic way, but you're responding to it as well. So Proteus is amazing. Panoramical is another great one. That's not out yet, but Panoramical is maybe has a little more in common with musical instruments. It's a game where you use a MIDI controller just to kind of affect a musical landscape. And as you change the dials up and down, the landscape just changes and moves in this dynamic and surprising way. On the top right there is Ambient Flight. That's a virtual reality game where you're a bird. There's no more to it than that. You're just a bird. And that's great, you know? These are simple experiences. They don't have goals. And because they don't have goals, I think it brings you to center more. Instead of focusing on an external thing that you are trying to impact, you're just being. Pixel Junk 4am, another musical creation game for PlayStation. This is an incredible game. This is called Frequency Domain. That's also not out. But that's a game where you put in a piece of music, and just as you said earlier, sorry, I don't know your name, but you mentioned music as a, you're listening to a piece of music you love, and it creates, so you see the FFT map. You know, we're very familiar with seeing, you might hear a sound and like see a wave representing the low end and the high end. So you're kind of racing along this FFT map. And again, there's no goals. You just move along with it. And it's a new way to interact with your music. And it's really fun. Something I didn't put on here that I totally think is a video dream, but you know, a game that, sorry, video dream is my word. And that's a game without goals. A game that is designed to kind of bring you into this blissful present state. And but one that does have goals that I think is absolutely incredible and totally worth checking out. It's for iPad or iPhone. It's called Super Hexagon. And Super Hexagon is a very easy game to play. The mechanics are very simple. You just rotate. But it happens so quickly that you can't think. If you're thinking about the game and if you're thinking about how to win the game, you're going to lose. So what ends up happening when people play it is they just turn off their brain and play it. And it brings people to this really zenned out space. So I want to talk about Sound Self, which is my project, and it's a real passion project of mine. I've been working on it for about 3 years. It's totally weird. So Jamie brought up Deep Sea earlier, which was my previous project. Deep Sea was played like this. A player would wear a gas mask, this really suffocating, uncomfortable thing that made breathing difficult. They couldn't see out of it, they're blinded, but they can hear, and what they can hear are sea monsters out in the distance. So I was coming at this as, I was experimenting. I wanted to see how immersive an experience I could create. You know, in video games, man, there's almost no buzzword more overused than immersion. Especially now as we're getting into the age of virtual reality and everyone's talking about immersion this, immersion that. But I was really interested in immersion and in creating an experience, creating a fiction that would be so compelling that it would utterly remove the player's reality. And by reality, I mean, you know, our sort of this fiction, and replace it with a fiction of my own creation. And the reason I chose to make it scary was because I knew that there's the old thing, if you, the Darwinian thing, if you see a movement, a rustle in the grass, and you think it's a snake, your survival chances are a little more likely, even if it's not a snake. So we're kind of hardwired to just jump at something scary and to assume the worst case scenario is something scary. And I knew from my experience playing horror games how much that shut off the part of me that thinks critically about things and lets me just believe. So I decided I'm going to make a horror experience. I'm going to literally shut out the world around people as much as possible so that all they will be left with is the fiction that I create for them. How well will that work? And I was really surprised to see it worked incredibly well. Somebody fainted playing it, and that's a little weird. I would often see people come out of the experience literally shaking and unable to speak for like 5 or 10 minutes. And so it was way more successful than I anticipated. And after the person, oh, sorry, what did you say?
PTSD.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Like I wasn't really thinking about the ethics of what I was doing at the time. I was just like, let's see how immersive a thing I can make will be. I was coming off the coattails of having made this thing and not understanding why it was as effective as it was. I was really confused because I didn't think it would work as well as it did when I started making it. And this guy had fainted playing it at South by Southwest, and I realized I don't want to make art that makes people faint and freak out. And I was at Burning Man, and I assume that other people in the speaker series have talked about Burning Man. I know Mikey Segal was here. Does anybody not know about the Burning Man Festival? Okay, great. Oh, you don't. Okay. Okay. So Burning Man Festival, big transformative festival out in Nevada. It's the third largest city in Nevada for the week that it exists. And wow, I really don't know how to describe it actually. Okay. But I was out at Burning Man, and I was on a mild dose of LSD, and I was in this dome. And excuse me as I bring my personal story into this a little bit, but I think my personal story is sort of important to some of the later points I'm going to be making about novelty. So to me, LSD was a novelty. I was taking it just out of kind of curiosity and playfulness. And I was in this dome that was filled with music, and I began chanting because I find chanting really grounding. And as I began chanting, that dome just happened to fill up with voices in that moment. The music in that space did. And it felt to me like those voices, because they came at the same time as I began using my voice, it felt to me like those voices were my voice. And that was sort of the first domino to fall for me in my sensation of self as separate from non-self. Everything else just evaporated until I was everything. Right? I was the room, I was all the voices, I was the whole festival, I was the whole planet, and then I'm everything. This is a spiritual experience, a peak experience, a mystical experience, and this is the first time that I had an experience like that. And I realized several months later, I'm a game designer, I think about systems, I think about game design, I think about games and the way they affect our mental makeup, just as I do about audio, how that happens subversively. And I realized I could trigger something like that with game mechanics. So here are some of the tenets of what makes up a mystical experience. I read this in some piece of scientific journalism. I'm an artist, I'm not a scientist, so I did not place the scientific journalism here, but this is the real thing, man. No, I don't know, but I find this useful. I found this list very useful when I started designing Sound Self. So if I want to create a mystical experience, that is maybe an experience of unity with an intuitive sense of deep truth. It has a noetic quality, a feeling of sacredness, a positive mood, and a transcendence of time and space, or maybe a non-existence of time and space. A feeling of ineffability, which means that I can't describe it to you. And everybody here who's had a mystical experience, either drug-induced or otherwise, knows that you can't really explain it. So as I started thinking about designing for something like this, my intuition came with realizing that I could create a unity experience. I didn't know if I could hit these other things. I think I intuitively thought maybe if I get one of these things, the other things will follow. And unity is sort of my designer's way into fabricating a mystical experience. So, video games have been stretching identity, stretching our subjective experience of self for their entire lifespan. I talked about Mario earlier. Okay, who here has ever played a video game? Okay, cool. So, if you press jump, if you're like playing Mario and you press jump, nobody ever says, even pretty much when they're just learning to play the game, nobody ever says, I pressed the button and it made that character jump. People say, I jumped. So, already, I mean, and nobody, that's amazing! And nobody in games talks about that miraculous stretching of self that happens in even the simplest video game, in asteroids. I rotated and shot the asteroid, right? Nobody talks about that, but like the point is, this technology is already fit for the stretching of this malleable, subjective sense of self, and we've been practicing doing this for 40 years or so. And not only in playing video games, but in designing them as well. I had got this really funny email today from my programmer. I got this nasty bug in Sound Self that was crashing everything, and I sent him an email saying like, hey, can you fix this? And when he sent me an email back, he said, oh yeah, I was trying to look for a file that wasn't there, so it crashed. I was trying to look for a file, not I made the program tried, but he had this identity stretched to include his creation. So anyway, video games have been doing this for forever. But there's sort of a limit to how that approach has been taken. I mean, there's usually an adversarial setting of some sort. So you'll have the part of the video game experience that is you in opposition to a part that is not you, or against a background that is not you and in opposition to a part that is not you and opposing you. Any game with an avatar has, it might be stretching your sense of self, but it's stretching your sense of self to include something that you identify with against a background of stuff you're not identifying with. And this is where I want you to remember what it felt like when you were writing. The inputs to most video games are digital. They use your hands. We're used to using our hands for completing tasks, for doing things we're thinking about. Especially, and I think of that as sort of a low bandwidth interaction. Instead of just being and doing, you're compressing what you're trying to do into a language that then expresses itself. So we have this low bandwidth interaction with the system. Versus, I mean, what would a high bandwidth interaction with the system? I think when we're connecting with one another. A friend of mine said recently to me, and I thought this was amazing, when we're having conversations together, conversation is just the thing that's happening to keep us present while we connect. You don't really connect because of your words. I mean, maybe sometimes. But the words themselves are compressed expression of self. The looking into each other's eyes and being here and laughing together, that's uncompressed being. So I think most of the time when we're controlling video games, we're controlling it through a compressed mechanism. So sound self's interaction is not a compressed mechanism. Or I don't think it is. It's voice. When I hear my voice, I mean, part of what I'm doing now is talking to you, and there's data being transmitted. You know, I'm compressing ideas into sound that I can give to you and hope you understand and hope you hear. But when I hear my voice, I don't really hear my voice. I hear me. I feel me vibrating in my chest, whether it's framed into words or if it's just going, oh, that sounds and feels like me. That sounds and feels like self, like identity. So sound self uses a vocal input. And this is now, I've been talking about sound self as you know, for a little while, and now I'm actually going to explain what it does. So you create a sound, and the system hears your sound and resonates with it. If you go, oh, sound self will go, it'll match the tone you're producing. So you feel that sound in your chest, and with feeling that sound in your chest is feeling you, or feeling me. And you also hear a sound play back that resonates with it. But that sound is not the same as your voice. But because it resonates with the vibration that is happening in your chest, it sounds like you. And because there's visualization going on that is synchronized with the sound you're hearing, it sort of looks like you. And because there are these complex systems that are responding to you, audiovisual systems, they're beautiful, which distracts you from, you know, thinking, oh, this is sort of funny. That sounds like me and feels like me and looks like me, but that's not really me. That's this video game, right? Because it's beautiful, because it responds to you and it's dynamic and it's playful, and because it's obtuse, you can't understand it. You can't understand why it's responding to you or the ways it's responding to you. Like a musical instrument, you know, you get that expansion of yourself, but it ends at the instrument, and the instrument sort of feels like a body part. And I didn't want sound self to feel like an extension of you. I want sound self to feel like an extension of you that then expands to be everything. So it's obtuse. You can't understand it, but you feel this relationship with the thing. So it's not a musical instrument. It's not an instrument. You're not using it. It's dancing with you. It's moving with you. So I'm trying to get people to stay present, notice the present, and to do that, you repeat a tone, repeat something that feels like me, and you surrender. And we get the surrender just by, that it's beautiful. So the tone, I think, is uncompressed identity. And the surrender comes from the obtuse systems. I get this thing that happens all the time when I watch players play Sound Self, which is where, especially gamers, a gamer will come into play Sound Self, and they'll get really frustrated because they don't get it. And it doesn't want you to get it, but they don't get it, and it's frustrating and annoying, and then they're just like, I give up. And as soon as they give up, that's when it gets in. I want the rewards from playing Sound Self to come unconditionally, not as a teaching mechanism to teach you the right way to play it. So Sound Self's designed to reward everything you do with your voice, which is really difficult as a programmer to predict what are people going to do and how can I reward all of it. An early build of Sound Self didn't reward breathing, so people didn't breathe. This is not very meditative. So now when you breathe, it's like magic happens. I think of Sound Self as being maximalist. And I think of maximalism as being a subset of minimalism. Minimalism is very simple design. Maximalism in games is very simple design, but just overwhelming stimulus. And because the stimulus is so overwhelming, you can't question it. If you've got a drum going boom, 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 boom in your ear, and if you've got these visuals that are changing in front of you and the sound's really loud, you can't really stop and be like, oh yeah, this is interesting. You just have to be like, ah! Sorry, did somebody say something? Okay. I think Sound Self hits a bunch of these. It gets that unity experience for people who have no meditation experience whatsoever. It gives people a positive mood, definitely gives people that feeling of transcendence of time and space, gets people to stop thinking, and you can't describe it, which makes this a very difficult product to market. But the things I don't really get are an intuitive sense that this is the truth and a feeling of sacredness, which makes me wonder whether or not what I'm triggering is in fact a peak experience or just something that is different enough from normal waking experience to be noteworthy, but not necessarily like a mystical awakening. So, some of the dangers of meditation. Meditation without discipline is not meditation. I don't teach you how to meditate, and I just kind of strap a rocket onto your back and press a button and go. And you're not learning anything about yourself there, really. I mean, you're not learning how to access that place. You're not building an infrastructure for accessing that place. I think this is something to consider as we move forward with these types of technologies is vocabulary, is what we call them. I call Sound Self a meditative experience, but that's because there's not really any better words out there for it. I don't think of it quite as meditation, though. I think of it more as like a psychedelic. It might not be meditation, but it is hypnosis. And hypnosis can be scary, can be dangerous. And so one of the design tenets I have in Sound Self is I keep it entirely abstract, because if it's abstract, I'm not accidentally encoding my thoughts and teaching you something I don't want to be teaching. I want it to be a mirror. I want somebody to play Sound Self and discover something about themselves and maybe like not take on some understanding of the universe that I have, but that they might not discover within themselves. So I stay far away from symbols and keep it just totally abstract. And it's just a novelty. But novelty is awesome. And this is, I think, kind of an important part of my talk. And what I have to tell you about here is, you sort of get two entry points into a meditation practice. And for me, My entry point into a meditation practice came from psychedelics, came from downing some LSD and having a mystical experience of Burning Man. It didn't come from a desire to know myself better. It came from curiosity and playfulness. And people come to meditation either out of desperation because they need something, or they come out of curiosity. I came from curiosity, and I think a lot of the way we talk about meditation, particularly in the Buddhist container, is as something you need. And people who don't think they need anything, or don't realize the needs, that the trances that they have going on, are not necessarily going to go after something that says this is something you need, right? But they might go after something that looks fun and silly. There's a cultural leverage to novelty here in the West. This is Kotaku, which is a really a major gaming outlet. I get covered in this stuff, and I don't mean this to boast, but like SoundSelf gets covered all over the place. SoundSelf was on NPR, it was on Kotaku, it's on major gaming outlets all the time. It raised a lot of money on Kickstarter, and that's not because it's like awesome, because the people who are reading this haven't played it, so they don't know if it's awesome or not. It's because it's novel. It's because it's weird. And weirdness, in the age of the internet, weirdness is leverage. Here is a quote from a forum of somebody accusing me of engaging in corrupt relationships with the press. And while he's accusing me of engaging with corrupt relationships with the press, this is somebody who's, I don't know this person, right? But I'm going to assume this is a gamer who's playing shooter games. And he says, I'm curious about SoundSelf. I really am. Admittedly, it's a game that makes every sound dumb while playing. So, novelty is leverage. Novelty is not practice. Novelty is not teaching you something. And I don't, like if somebody plays SoundSelf and has this amazing experience and then goes on to have a meditation practice, then great, that's really great for them. If they don't, then great, that's fine. I'm really, and I want to be really emphatic about this, I'm not trying to recruit meditators. I'm trying to give people radical experience. I have a few predictions. Oh, do I have where's my, oh yeah, okay. I want to talk about virtual reality some. So SoundSelf supports virtual reality, and virtual reality is like sort of the mother of all novelties right now, and it's sort of the mother of all the things that people are excited about. So I'm piggybacking on the excitement about virtual reality. Everybody here knows about the Oculus Rift or about virtual reality and about. Does anybody not know what I mean when I say virtual reality? Okay, awesome. So I have a few predictions. I think that in the coming decade or so, especially with virtual reality, because it works. Virtual reality is amazing now. And it's not out yet for consumers, but when it comes out, we're going to see people, well, first we're going to see a lot of people recycling the same old bullshit, but we're also going to see a lot of people experimenting and trying crazy new stuff. And I'm not the only person developing things to make you feel centered and grounded. With virtual reality, right, I mean, let's talk about like taking your reality for granted, right? I think the thing I'm trying to do in SoundSelf above all is just have it so that when you come back to your normal reality, you're like, oh, I can't take this for granted anymore because I've experienced something different. So if you put on a virtual reality headset and it's an entirely compelling reality, and it's getting there, it's getting to being an entirely compelling reality, what happens when you take off the virtual reality headset? Does it wonder, is there a virtual reality headset here I can take off? I mean, that's even with a shooter game, right? Even with just a stupid gamer game. And I mean no disrespect to those games. I play those games, but I just mean, they're old school. Even one of those, if you take off the mask and this doesn't feel more real than this. So it's also a really cool new medium. When you can do that, you can replace your reality with a reality where you're holding a gun and shooting people, or you can replace your reality where you're not a person at all, which is what I'm trying to do. You can do any number of things that I think were really, truly impossible before virtual reality as a technology. So I think the coming decade is going to show not only a really radical transition in what we're doing with video games, but also what we're doing with interactive, entertaining technology. So, a few things on ethics, which is something I think about a lot and something I worry about a lot because I'm sort of in a new space and nobody's looking over my shoulder and saying, you should be careful about that. So novelty is not a mask for dishonest subversion. And this is what I mean when I say I don't want to dress sound stuff up as novelty, but actually have it be something that is meant to convert you into a Buddhist meditation practice, right? That would feel dishonest to me. It's a novelty, and it's dressed as a novelty. And it's not pretending to be anything else. It might have the side effect, as my first novelty experiences with LSD had, of introducing me to something a little different, but that's not the goal. And I think it would be unethical to create a novel experience in order to kind of trick somebody into something they aren't ready for. So this is really powerful technology. With the hypnosis thing in particular. So I feel confident that what I'm doing right now is good for people, but I have a small sample size. So honestly, I don't really know. I have good intentions, but we're in the beginning of something. We're creating new technologies here. We don't know what works, what doesn't. We don't know what the side effects are going to be. And something I am worried about is, like I said, this is powerful stuff. And I'm creating this technology within an infrastructure of gaming. And I've been to talks at the Game Developers Conference where people use the word addiction as though it is a quality mark of your game. You made an addicting game. Good job. So, So I have a little bit of nervousness around what happens when you get people who are not necessarily approaching this with the warmest of intentions, but do have access to the power of this technology. And oh yeah, last thing is addiction. And this is sort of, if there were an Enlightenment button, would you press it, right? If there were an Enlightenment button, but it only worked for as long as you were pressing it, would you just hold down on the button? So, I don't know. I don't think Sound Self has a risk of being addictive, but maybe. And maybe future iterations of this technology will. And I think it's something to be wary of. All right, thank you very much. Oh, any questions? There's plenty of time for questions, I believe. Yeah.
What's Buddhist about this?
What's Buddhist about this? So, okay, I've only recently been introduced to Buddhism. Very recently. Actually, the Buddhist Geeks conference where we met was sort of my first encounter with Buddhism, as more than just like a concept for something other people engage in, but I did. So, my understanding of Buddhism now, or what interests me about Buddhism now, is that within the history of Buddhism, Buddhism seems to me to be the most robust scholarly exploration of meditation and how to reach the now that we have, right? And there's all sorts of other things with it, right? There's myths and so on within Buddhism. But what interests me about Buddhism is that 2,500 years of scholarly research. So I don't know what's Buddhist about this, but I'm interested with my technology at pointing at the same thing that meditation is pointing at, which is here, now. So I think that's it. Yes?
Can you help us understand about Sound Self? Is it something you can go home and have on your iPad, or is it something you have to go to a gaming room and strap yourself into? Just tell us what.
Yeah, sure. So it's a PC, Mac, Linux. You can play it on your computer screen. I think the best way to play it is with a virtual reality headset. We showed it at Burning Man projected against a wall. But the basic setup is screen or any visual interface, screen or virtual reality device, headphones, microphone. And multiple people can play it together as well, which is kind of fun.
It's also very inexpensively available on the internet.
Oh, yeah.
Via PayPal, there's a couple of different tiers. For $15, you can get in on, the initial developer. For $30, you get to be an alpha player.
Yeah.
And get everything all at once. And yeah, you can just takes a couple of minutes to set it up and go.
It's super in development and super buggy right now, but we are selling copy, and that's part of how we fund development, is selling alpha access to people. Oh no, it doesn't use Flash Player.
Some of the concerns you list at the end, it just starts me to thinking about if there's an analogy here, like with the FDA, and when you develop certain drugs, and you don't really know what the effect is going to be yet, or how long-term taking of the drug, what it will do, and so they have to have strict clinical trials,
Yeah.
and for years to have that, and even with those safeguards in place, you may have 20 years later saying that, oh, we didn't know this drug was going to cause cancer or deformity, and so with psychedelic drugs, you have generations of people who've had lots of experience
Certainly.
with them and know the pitfalls of psychedelic drugs. And so it's interesting, I had not thought of this really before, but in the technology, in the methods that you're using and potential effects that they have on the psyche, as you say, well, we don't really know, I don't really know, and I don't really know, and yet you could really do something of significance to somebody's mental state. That I was going to ethics, but are you starting to think maybe there should be like an FDA or something? I mean, you're playing in very kind of, when you're dealing with addictions, you know that already with games, you see that in children. You're dealing in very kind of risky territory. So
I think I'm not sure that I would trust a regulating organization more than I would trust, So here's another thing. To me, this is a piece of art, and I think that, and I've thought about what is sound self a lot. I've thought about, as I stumbled upon this and started creating it, it's like, oh wow. People are saying this could be good for their friend with PTSD, or this could be like used to teach meditation or whatever, right? And I was thinking long and hard about this stuff. Like, wow, well, do I expand and try to treat it like a tool? And
psychotic behavior.
Calm psychotic behavior. Yeah, like seriously, people have. But one of the reasons I settled on no, it's a game, it's a video game, is because I don't want to call it a tool. I don't want to. I think calling it a tool and making certain promises about what it's going to do for you is not really honest. And on the other hand, art triggers people. And I think this is something we know about art, is that it can. There were people going into Saving Private Ryan who were strongly triggered with PTSD, and I've had people come out of Sound Self with what seems like a bad trip. So sound self triggers people, certainly. But I think naming it art makes it a little more fair game, because I think with art you're going into it expecting to be taken on a ride, and sometimes that ride takes you somewhere if you're watching Keeping Up with the Kardashians season 4, you know what you're going to get. But if you're trying something that you expect to be surprised by, something different and weird.
So do you think of any age limit or any sort of warning or any caution?
I certainly use a warning for epilepsy, and because we're using, we're doing a lot of. I'm because we're kind of pre-release. It's something I'm still thinking about. Age restriction. There's lots of strobing effects. Yeah, seizures. In terms of other warnings, it's something I'm honestly kind of thinking about, right? I don't think an age restriction, because, so actually I think the people who I've seen kind of get the most out of Sound Self are children, surprisingly. Children play it and they don't have the same skepticism that we adults do, the same embedded trances, and so they immediately get it. And I showed this, I went to a convention, I went to Minecon, which is a Minecraft conference, and showed this to tons of kids. And surprisingly, kids had some of the most mature interactions with it. I had a lot of kids say, oh, this is a meditation experience. I was like, oh my God, you're 10. So I definitely don't think an age restriction. In terms of other warnings, like, yeah, this is playing with your perception. This is designed to hack your perception. And that's why I say on the website, hacks your perception. Because on the website for Sound Self, I say it uses techniques to hack your perception and induce a blissful state, right? But it's powerful stuff, and I don't want people to get into it thinking it's not powerful stuff. Any more questions?
Thank you. You know, I have to say, in response to why is it Buddhist, it's like, so why did I invite Robin out here, right? I met him at, I didn't know anything about his work beforehand. I probably passed over even before I went to the Buddhist Geeks conference because I didn't know what the hell. I probably didn't click on you and find out who you were. But when I listened to what he was talking about, and especially the trance part of it, it resonates. Trance in Buddhism has a deep, long history. We talked about this just on Monday a little bit. It's been kind of banned from the Buddhist insight meditation movement because trance jhana states, states of altered consciousness, have been seen as somehow peripheral to the main goal of insight or awareness. But they've been making a comeback, And so when I listened to Robin's discussion of trance in relation to the game design world, my mind just kind of went out into a tantric mandala, right? It just kind of went out there, and I saw all of these connections that felt very much like things I knew very well from other worlds. That plus the immersive nature of things, and that as a new technology of awareness seemed to me to be pretty much quintessentially a Buddhist adventure. So, thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having me.